go. Rami Khouri is a friend. He's also a professional associate. Now, our friendship is not new. It goes back to well over 3 decades. And Rami might remember that the first adventure we had together was when he was living in Amman, and we did two Rami, not one, programs of Encounter. Encounter is the equivalent of, say, Andrew Marr's Sunday here in the UK. It looks at political and social issues impacting the region, and it used to be broadcast on JTV2, which is the English channel of Jordan television. Since then, we've had our paths. Rami has been to Lebanon. He now commutes between Lebanon and the United States. He works with the American University of Beirut, with the Issam Faris Institute as well. He is involved in ecumenical as well as political issues. And I have pretty much done the same. You know a little bit about me, so I don't need to repeat anything more. All I would add is that I will be putting in the description box 2 of Rami's latest articles, one from September 2019 that he wrote, a very interesting one for Carnegie USA, and the other one is for the New Arab based here in the UK of October 2020. Now, interestingly enough, 3+ decades of friendship. We've met in Amman, we've met in Beirut, we've met in Jerusalem, we've even met in London, and we haven't fallen out. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And why do I say that? I say that because Rami also wrote the foreword, a brilliant foreword to my book, Keeping Faith with Hope, the Challenges of Israel-Palestine. So, without further ado, having done a little bit of an introduction, the rest is all in links in the description box. Let me now say welcome, Rami, to this new episode of Intuitive Reactions in the MENA and Gulf region. I'm going to draw a picture for you, and I'm going to ask you to join the dots or tell me what you think of this picture, the whys, the wherefores. If today in October 2020, I were to look at this vast space that I call the MENA and Gulf regions, Middle East, North Africa and Gulf regions, some people call it West Asia, North Africa and the Gulf, what do I see? First, I see Palestine and the Palestinian hopes for self-determination marginalized. The Palestinian conflict itself these days is, in my opinion, in a sliding slope due to leadership, due to concatenation of circumstances with President Trump and Jared Kushner's famous Middle East deal of the century, due whatever, but Palestine is no longer, due to the Arab realities, is no longer on the radar or on the agenda. Then if I look at the MENA region, the Middle East, North Africa region, I see 2 phases of what you call revolutionary uprisings. The first one included countries like Syria, like Egypt, like Tunisia, started in 2010, 2011. And then the second phase included other countries in the Arab world, such as Lebanon, Iraq, and Algeria. Those uprisings had all of them hope. Hope for dignity, hope for freedom. They were quashed. Today, perhaps, if I were to be ambitious, I would say that the only example of something changing to the better would be Tunisia. Then I look at the Gulf Cooperation Council, the 6 Arab countries of the Gulf, and I look at both the spat, what I call in my writings and my interviews, the silly argument between Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain on the one side and Qatar on the other, whereby those 3 countries decided to apply the principle of my way or the highway to Qatar. Either you alter your foreign policy to suit our priorities, or we do not talk with you and we boycott you and we embargo you. And of course, if there was one organization that kind of worked, it doesn't work anymore either. And finally, what do we have? We also have the counter-revolutionary forces, where a lot of money and a lot of repressive forces countered those ambitions of the Arab grassroots for their freedom and their dignity. So what do we have today? Quoting you a little bit and adding my own labels a little bit, I would say for me, the MENA and Gulf regions consist of poverty, despair, hopelessness, frustration, a lot of real anger, inertia, as well as confessionalism or sectarianism, particularly in countries like Lebanon and perhaps even in Iraq. I don't want to be too desperate. I don't want to be too pessimistic. So I'm going to do what the famous Palestinian communist Emil Habibi, the thinker and politician, said, I'm a pes-optimist. In Arabic, the word is mutasha'il. And I will say, okay, is this really when we sort of say, Rami, we're checkmated, forget the region? Or is this perhaps the precursor for a new identity and new governance? These are the facts as I see them, and I want somebody of your caliber in the 10 to 12 minutes we have before we are cut off to give me your thoughts. And I promise you, Armenian though I am, and we like talking a lot, I will try to keep mum as we all listen to you.
Thank you.
Rami.
Thank you. You've given a pretty good overview of some of the main problems in the regions. The issues you described, anger, despair, humiliation, sectarianism, actually are mostly symptoms of the real underlying problems. And my suggestion to anybody outside the Middle East or in the Middle East, but particularly people in Europe, North America, Asia, anywhere around the world, and particularly people dealing with policymaking, whether it's the European Parliament or national governments or international NGOs, I would urge them to go beyond the superficial media-driven focus on the negative things that we see in the region. Refugees, terrorism, civil wars, these are all realities, and they're real, but they're all symptoms of something deeper. And in 3-4 minutes, I will give you what I think are the interconnected in time and in place issues that have brought us to this situation. The situation where in the last 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, we've had nonstop national uprisings across probably half of the Arab countries. At least 10 or 12 countries have had serious uprisings, and they continue in Sudan and Lebanon and Iraq and in Algeria, and on and off in other countries. And of course, we had the big set of uprisings in 2010 to 11 that brought about various changes, including the Tunisian transformation that you mentioned, which is the most hopeful. But these are symptoms or consequences of deeper trends. And those deeper trends are the following. In chronological order, I would list them. The oldest one is the tradition of foreign powers, military powers, intervening directly in the Middle East for over 2 centuries. Since Napoleon, we have had Arab countries and other Iranian and Turkish, other Arab countries, other Middle Eastern countries, militarily invaded or attacked or laid siege to by foreign powers. It started with Napoleon, but then after that you had everybody joining the game. Today you have the Russians, the Iranians, the Americans, the French, the British, everybody's involved now.
Even the Turks are involved these days.
And even the Turks in parts of the region. So foreign military direct intervention is the oldest and one of the fastest growing reasons for the convoluted Middle East that we have today. The second one that's linked to this is the Arab-Israeli conflict. A lot of people in the West, particularly in the United States, where mostly numbskulls who write columns talk about the region and don't really know what they're talking about, say, well, the Arab-Israeli conflict is over, people forget about it, Arab governments are making peace with Israel. The reality is actually very different. The reality is that the Arab-Israeli conflict is 100 years old now. And it has been the longest, most sustained, and most divisive conflict in the region, which continues to resonate deeply among Arab populations, which we know from serious public polling that is taking place all across the region. And the most recent one came out earlier this week from the Arab Center in Doha, which does a regional poll. We're showing where across the region, somewhere between 60 and 80% of people always say that their main security threat that they feel is Israel and the United States, and they support the rights of the Palestinian people as a priority issue for them. This has been constant for 100 years. It hasn't stopped. Now, the Arab-Israeli conflict, combined with foreign military intervention, triggered the third problem that has created most of the mess in the Middle East today. And I'm here talking primarily about Arab countries now. Most of the problems in Arab countries came out of the combination of Western militarism, colonialism, and intervention with the Arab-Israeli conflict, which was very much driven by the combination of Zionist forces starting in the late 19th century, and European intervention. The Balfour Declaration, for instance, was a flagrant example of colonial criminality, where the British, who had no rights in Palestine in 1917, decided to support the creation of a Jewish homeland there. This is 1917. We're not talking about post-Holocaust, which creates different realities. So flagrant international intervention in the Arab-Israeli conflict led to the coming to power in Arab countries, starting in the 1940s and early 50s, of military regimes. The relationship between the Arab-Israeli conflict, foreign militarism, and Arab military officers, most of whom, or all of whom, have proved to be incompetent, took power in Iraq, in Syria, in Egypt, in Libya, in Yemen, in Sudan, all over the region. Military officers took power and ran entire Arab countries and economies, and mostly ran them into the ground. And if you look at the legacy of Saddam Hussein, Hafiz al-Assad, Muammar Gaddafi, Hosni Mubarak, and Sadat, and now Sisi in Egypt, go across the region, look at these military officers. They've left their wreckages behind. And there's a direct link there between the Arab-Israeli conflict, which pushed military officers to tell their people only the military can protect you from Zionism and the Western forces that were taking Arab land back in the 40s and 50s. So those three historical factors have to be seen together. And that's why some of the issues that need to be addressed by anybody who comes into power in the United States or in Europe or around the world is to look at those three things and realize that those were man-made problems and they have man-made solutions. And when I say man-made, they were all men. There was no woman who were involved in these. They're all the result of human policymaking, bad policymaking. Then you have the contemporary consequences of those three, which are, first of all, widespread and growing poverty and marginalization of populations. One of the articles that I gave you, and you said is listed, it talks about the expansion of poverty and vulnerability across the region. We're talking today, based on
powerful piece, that one, yeah.
We're talking about 3/4 of the Arab people being poor and vulnerable and marginalized. And this is extraordinary. And this is supposed to be a wealthy region. It is a wealthy region, but it's been badly managed. And with corrupt, incompetent governments, mostly led by officers, we've reduced the citizenry to a group of pauperized, desperate people who don't know what to do. That then led to the second current reality, and it's current now, the uprisings, what I call revolutionary uprisings, because they're spontaneous uprisings of desperate citizens who don't know what to do. They have no political rights. Their economic situation is desperate. They don't have a chance in hell of their kids getting good jobs. And they've just taken to the streets saying, remove these entire political systems. So they're action is spontaneous uprising, but their aims are revolutionary in that they want to change the whole system and the relationship between the citizen and the state. And then that brings us to the sixth issue, and these six really should be looked at as a package by anybody who's interested in doing anything in the Middle East, whether it's you're coming for tourism, business investment, you're a policymaker, you give aid, you're a donor, you're a NGO intervening for humanitarian work, whatever you do, you have to look at these six issues. And the sixth one is the fragility of statehood. The Arab countries, for the most part, even the wealthy ones with a lot of oil and energy, for the most part, Arab countries have failed the triple tests of the last century of statehood, citizenship, and sovereignty. And what I mean by that is individual citizens don't feel like citizens, and that's why we have these uprisings now, 10 years nonstop, and many other protests before that, but big national uprisings, 10 years now nonstop. The sovereignty issue is a real problem in most Arab countries. Most Arab countries cannot control their borders. If you look at Libya, you look at Syria, you look at Iraq, you look at Yemen, you look at Lebanon and other countries, that people come in and out at will, whether they're foreign armies or regional militias or whoever they may be. And other forms of lack of sovereignty are Arab countries that have to get the approval of some foreign power to carry out a policy decision. So if somebody in the Arab world wants to buy American advanced jets or British or French advanced jets, they've got to get the approval of the Israeli government. And this is happening right now. If you look at the UAE and Qatari requests for F-35 jets from the US, the Israelis must approve this. And the United States has contributed to this set of problems by mandating officially through the American Congress that the United States will make sure that Israel always remains militarily stronger than all of the forces around it that are against it. And
Rami, let me butt in there. When you said this, it reminds me, wasn't one of the arguments made for the normalization between the UAE and Israel is because the UAE wanted to get those advanced fighter jets, and it had to get the goodwill of Israel for Congress to approve it.
That's right, and this raises another question, which is that that Arab policymaking, and you look at Sudan now. The Americans are pressuring Sudan quite openly that you've got to recognize Israel if you want aid, if you want to get off the terrorism list. So Arab countries don't have control of their own sovereign decision making. It often has to be approved by Israel, and in many cases, big foreign powers, not just the US. In some cases, it's the Russians or the Iranians who are the foreign supporters. So sovereignty has really been diluted, let's say, in most Arab countries. And statehood, citizenship, sovereignty, and statehood, the three failures in most Arab countries. The statehood issue is that most of the countries are turbulent inside, whether it's civil war, whether it's mass immigration, and across the region, something like 40% of young people under the age of, say, 35, they want to immigrate. I mean, that's a huge, huge number. They just don't want anything to do with their countries. And this isn't just because of the current tensions. This has been like this for 20 years or so. And the states are fragmenting because the government has never looked at its citizens as people with rights. It has looked at them as subjects, and people have put up with this. They put up with this for decades because their lives were improving in the developmental spree between 1920 and 1980. But ever since then, it's been downhill. Poverty has grown, services have declined, and one of the responses of the state in most states, there's a few that are better, but most Arab states have responded with greater militarization, security responses, beating up and arresting and indicting their citizens, and ignoring large segments of the population, saying, well, we just don't have enough money to open clinics everywhere, and they leave parts of the country, mostly the poor areas, they leave them for NGOs and religious groups and others. So these six issues are my summary of why we are as we are, and what are the issues that any foreign party interested or engaged in the region should look at.
Rami, let me ask you, there's about roughly just over 1 minute, 60 seconds, and then I have to say thank you and stop the recording. It was wonderful the way you managed in those few minutes to put together the summary, a synopsis of what is wrong. Now, in my introduction, I quoted Emil Habibi and peace optimism. Another one that comes to mind is another popular expression, physician, heal thyself. The question I would ask you is, and it's a big ask in 1 minute, do you see hope for the future, or might we as well throw the chessboard and say, that's it for now, see you in 50 years?
Oh, no, there's definitely hope for the future. I've been in the Arab world for the last 45 years and continue to spend about half the year there, coming and going. There's definitely hope. You see it in the young people who are out on the streets, not just rebelling and protesting, but building counter institutions, new institutions, coming up with community self-help streams, coming up with new legislation, anti-corruption drives, accountability mechanisms. There's a tremendous amount of human energy and vitality and goodness among the young people, especially in the Arab world, because they're fed up with this and they're scared. They have no future. So they've got to grab their condition and fix it. And so I've seen them. I know many of them. I work with them. I've reported about them. They are full of energy, wisdom, good sentiments, and it gives us all a lot of hope for the future.
That is wonderful. Rami, I started by saying we are friends. I'm going to add that one of the reasons I was thinking as you were talking, now this is just off the top of my head, when you were talking, one of the reasons I constantly refer to you when I want to understand a problem in the region is twofold. One, you speak with the mind and the heart, and that's not easy for an analyst. Analysts either go for the head or the heart. And the second thing is you, and to some extent, I think I do the same, you can turn left and talk to a Western audience. You can turn right and talk to an Arab audience because you were born in the States, you know the West well, but you've spent a lot of your time in the Arab world as well. And those few minutes, 15, 16, whatever it is, 17 minutes, are testimony to that. And I will make sure that as many people as possible will hear you out on this YouTube. And I thank you very, very much for giving me the time from Boston from Cambridge, not our Cambridge, your Cambridge, in order to give us those few pointers on the MENA and Gulf regions. Thank you very, very much indeed, Rami.
Thank you, Harry, and keep up your good work.
Thanks.